I told you I was going to make a new video about my theory on the Caylee Anthony case. And there are several places online where you can see a timeline of events that have happened in the case, and I'm looking at the one that says cfnews13.com. And it starts with June the 9th, the earliest date Caylee Anthony claims she dropped Caylee off with a babysitter. There are different dates that the family claims that they last saw Caylee. And Cindy Anthony claims that she last saw Caylee on Father's Day, which is, I believe, June 15th. George Anthony claims that he last saw Caylee, I believe it's the day after that. And that was suspect to me, because Cindy didn't see her that day. Okay, but the big fight that the family had, the big fight was on, I believe it was on Father's Day, and I could be wrong. But the big fight happened, and after that, Casey was reported to leave the house with her child in her car. I guess she didn't want to stay with her mother. You know, they were arguing, fighting, and Cindy had tried to choke her physically. So what that big fight was about, no one's quite sure. So, following the timeline, the Anthonys have somewhat changed their dates, you know, during different depositions, different testimonies, or different investigations through the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Their dates get mixed up and confused. Excuse me, I have a cold. Okay, my theory on this case is related to that duct tape, and related to those two cadaver dogs, two, not one, two cadaver dogs hitting on the back yard where the child played. You didn't have one cadaver dog hitting there, you had two different ones, and they hit in the same spot. And it's most likely that these trained cadaver dogs are not going to hit on the same spot by accident. So there's definitely something there, was something there on that spot in the backyard, beside the playground where her house was, her little playhouse, and her sandbox. So it could be that there was bodily fluid that had begun to decompose, a drop of blood from someone, or you know, etc. But my theory is that perhaps the child got hurt there, or perhaps the child died there, and that's where her body was picked up. And it's not near the pool. And I don't believe the drowning theory. I think that's something that Casey made up so that her father, she was giving her father a cue, and her father was supposed to, you know, take that cue and say, oh yes, the child drowned, which would, you know, get Casey out of first-degree murder. But it would also incriminate George Anthony, so he didn't take that cue. So that's one of the reasons I believe that George Anthony is somewhat involved in what happened with the child, for the reason that Casey gave that cue to him. And I don't believe the drowning theory. I believe the child died naturally. I believe the child got hurt or died with some kind of medical problem. If you do some research, you'll find that Caylee Anthony had no social security number, and that is so very suspect when you take into consideration that she is perhaps an incest child that they were hiding. You know, I doubt that Cindy Anthony knew that, and I'm quite sure that Cindy Anthony did not know that her daughter wasn't working. She believed all of her daughter's lies, the nanny lies, the I'm working lies, the people she made up at Universal lies. So Cindy was buying into all that. But I don't know that George bought all of that. In fact, I think George knew she was lying. And I think that George was the one giving her money. If you've watched my previous video, you see that I'm very adamant to believe that George Anthony's the father. The DNA test on the baby came back with overlapping identical genes, which screams incest. You know, a normal birth will give half the genes from the father, half the genes from the mother, and those genes will be completely different. But when the genes are overlapping and you only have a few genes from a unique father and the other genes match, then that means the mother and the father are blood related. And that's what you have in this case. If you go back to 2008, Dr. Baden, who is he did an autopsy on Caylee. He had an interview with Greta Van Susteren and told her that the father has been identified and the father is, quote, known. And everyone is beating this man down because he said that. But what it is, when the DNA test came back on the child and the genes were identical and overlapping, then the FBI immediately ordered a test for Lee Anthony. And when that test came back to be negative, then they stopped and they sealed everything because they knew at that point that George Anthony was the father. That's what Dr. Baden meant when he says that the father has been identified. And if you notice, Jose Baez has never pursued questioning a biological father. Now, the story about this Jesus Ortiz being killed in a car accident and that he was the father is completely bogus. That family came forward. They had an interview with the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and they gave their story, and it's that their son never knew Caylee Anthony. She was desperate to find a father for her child and made up lots of them during the years. But she was hiding the fact that, you know, this incest had occurred. Now, my theory goes back to what Dr. Baudet discovered about DNA and finding an incest child. And it's now that you can determine if your parents were blood related without getting DNA from your mother or from your father. It can be done just from your own DNA. Dr. Baudet discovered this when he was doing research on children who were retarded, had mental problems, had physical disabilities, and so forth. And it was determined that the genetic patterns of children born from a father-daughter relationship, or a mother-son, or a brother-sister, or daughter and grandfather, is the result is that it's an incest baby. It's called Determination of Ancestral Alleles for Human Single Nucleotide Polymorphisms, and that's the name of that test. You can look it up online. About the tape, why has someone not come forward and said that tape could have been on the garbage bag? How do we know for sure that it was on the mouth of the child? This is the photograph that they imposed the skull upon in the courtroom, and they moved the tape up and down here over the child's mouth because they can't know for sure where the tape was. So in their photograph to the jury, they had to move that tape up and down because they don't know exactly where it was on the child. Why do we know that it was on her mouth? It was tangled in her hair, but we don't know for sure that it was on her mouth. And my question is, if it was placed on her mouth while she was still alive, why did the child not pull it off? Was she passed out? What is that? No one said that her hands were tied. Well, why has no one come forward and done more research on that duct tape? There is no DNA on that duct tape. There is no DNA from Caylee Anthony on that duct tape. There's no DNA from Caylee Anthony on that duct tape. There's no DNA at all on that crime scene. The only DNA at the crime scene is a mystery hair, and it's 5 inches long, And they do not know who it belongs to. It doesn't match any of the people that they've tested. Okay, I'll have to do another one. My videos are running too long.